Okay, fantastic. Yes, hello. Thank you for having me and thank you for showing up today. We are going to be talking about writing our college essay, and I'm just going to go over a brief agenda for you guys so you know what to expect. We'll talk for what the admissions looks for in an essay. So, what are they actually asking you to provide them with? We'll go over some things that you should focus on as you're writing, as you're editing, some things definitely that we should be avoiding, as well as making the prompts work for you. So there's a set series of 7 prompts from Common App, and we can go through all of them and see which ones are able to be manipulated to your advantage. We'll do a specific example and analysis of my real college essay, so we can break it down. That's a great time also to ask questions about specific things, as you can do throughout this whole meeting. And we'll give you a list of tips, and then you can have a Q&A, and we are both happy to help you with that. So let us get started with what the admissions offices are actually looking for in your essay. Obviously, they want to know that you can write, of course, but beyond that, there are 4 main things that they really are looking for. So number one is authenticity. So schools, when they're choosing their population, they want unique individuals at the school, not necessarily people who all fit into a very specific mold. And your voice, your writer's voice, is a great way for you to show who you are. So the way that you make sentences is a direct reflection on the way that you're thinking, and that's something that nobody else can replicate, right? So they want you to have your unique voice on display. Nowadays, more and more people are kind of relying on AI or changing a lot of words using a thesaurus, and those are great tools to enhance your voice, but that should not replace the writing that you have created yourself. So make sure that you are writing about something that is specific to you and that other people would not be able to write. That is how your essay is going to stand out from all the hundreds and thousands that they read. Second thing, critical thinking. Critical thinking is very big in higher education. They want you to show that you know how to think and how to make connections by doing so and replicating that in your essay. So if you are writing about something that is small and specific to you, that only you can write, as is recommended, can you connect that to some larger message? Can you make these judgments and connections about things that are maybe broader topics? Unique perspectives might seem at first very similar to authenticity, but this is less about voice and more about your growth as a human being. So you're all nearly adults and have changed a lot over the course of your life. So you have to think about what has been most impactful for you. And again, I'm going to say this a lot, but the more specific you can be in how you have changed, what sets you apart from other people, the better your essay is going to do. And the fourth main thing that colleges will be looking for and universities is about values. So they don't necessarily need to hear how cool or how smart you are. You are essentially trying to sell yourself, but what they want more than anything is somebody that is kind, someone that can accept growth, learn from their mistakes, someone that has dreams and beliefs and wants to achieve things and maybe go on to do something in the future. And so that is definitely more important than a story that just upholds like, oh yeah, I'm really smart at this thing or I'm really talented at this thing. So values are definitely big as well. So in order to embody these 4 things and try and include them in our essay, here are some best practices for how you actually implement that in your writing. Number one, don't think of it as an essay, think of it as a narrative. So you're going to end up writing about yourself as if you were a protagonist in a novel. So when you read a book, you get a sense of the narrator or of the protagonist in the first chapter, and you can kind of get that right away from the very first page, right? You have to let your personality come out, as they do in novels, highlight specific things that are central to your so-called hero's journey. Treat it like a story, not so much as a school essay. You have to always keep in mind who you're writing for, what your audience is, and when you construct a narrative that is ultimately going to be far more compelling than something that is quite rote like a school essay. Along with that, you have to make sure that you are being yourself. This goes with authenticity. This goes with your unique perspective. You shouldn't change the way that you are thinking or writing because you think it will sound smarter. This has to do with a lot of times that we'll see people write their essay and then go and replace multiple words using a thesaurus, which is a great tool to use, but ultimately abusing that will make your essay sound like it is not being written by a real person. And as someone that has reviewed essays, it is definitely easy for people to tell, especially admissions officers who read a lot of these, when the sentence has been written and then just individual words have been replaced because the flow of it will change, right? If you normally have a big vocabulary, definitely use the words that you normally use, but also make sure that you keep your personality in it. You don't have to be afraid to use humor if you're a funny person or if you want to make the admissions people laugh. If things like math, science, music, if that is important to you, you want to include that in your writing as well. So you have to stay true to your individual style because that is something that sets you apart and will keep them thinking back to your essay in the future rather than reading a lot of essays that sound very similar. And then the thing that I think is most important, that is difficult to do, especially with the word limit, but you really just need to jump right in. If you start in media res, which is just in the middle of the action, as it were, this will help you not only deal with the word count, but it'll also help you appeal to the admissions officers themselves. The person that reads your essay is likely going to be reading hundreds of other essays every day, and so they don't need that big preamble or introduction to who you are. If you put them right in the action of your story from the very first sentence, the other things that might have gone in the introduction earlier can show up in the details of what you're actually writing about. And we'll talk about that when we look into the example. But there was a former professor at Stanford who said, talking about the hooks of a story is something along the lines of you want your reader to feel like they're about to miss the train so that they want to get involved. And so using that method of starting right in the middle of the action will be a great way to hook the admissions officer and keep them wanting to read your story, even as they have hundreds of other Common App applications on the way. There are some common traps that they're very easy to fall into, and this kind of goes back to the jumping in. It's very tempting to try and include everything because you want to give a picture of who you are, but that is ultimately impossible, right? Unfortunately, the admissions offices will not ever have the opportunity to know the entire life story that you have before making a decision, and so that should not be your focus of trying to include everything. The more specific that you are, the more grounded you are in small details, the more interesting your essay will be. And there are a lot of ways to still show the kind of person that you are in the details instead of making the whole essay about including all of the things that encapsulate you as a human being. The important parts of yourself that you want to express can show up in the small ways, just the ways that you write, the specific details that you're picking, and they don't necessarily need to go in a list of here are all of the things that I do. Also, unfortunately, there are some common tropes that there are countless essays that get written about the following things. So sports games are very big, volunteering is big, a big move, being the child of an immigrant or an immigrant yourself, losing a loved one. These things are definitely important and they have probably impacted who you are, surely, but they don't define you and they don't necessarily set you apart right away, even if your story is unique. That is not to say that you shouldn't include stories like this. That is just to say, instead of focusing on that being the topic of your essay, what you can do to set yourself apart is pick a very specific instance that has happened and then reference this in a larger context throughout the essay. You just have to keep in mind that someone who is reading 99 sports achievement essays will not be as inclined to pay attention to or fully grasp yours if that starts the same way. So it is definitely okay to talk about these things, but that shouldn't be the focus. What should be the focus is you and a very specific moment in your life that can keep them grounded in the essay. And that is also something that will show up in our example that we can get more into because I know that these are very important things that people want to talk about. Finally, perfection. Perfection and selling perfection of yourself is a very common pitfall. Uh, Honesty, authenticity, growth, change, all of that are things that they want more so than perfection. Perfection is boring. It is also inherently untrue. So you should give yourself the allowance to show your flaws so that you can show how you have grown from them. Make sure that you are a well-rounded person and that you're not just presenting some one-sided facade of yourself. So those are common pitfalls to avoid. Um, and we will go on to talking about the prompts. So the advice, oh, sorry, Priyanka, did you have something?
Yes. So I thought this would be the perfect time to ask a couple of questions, which we got over
Yeah.
chat. It would be great for everybody to hear the answer. I'll read out the first question out loud. Is there a word count for college applications?
Yes, so it depends. Common App applications, I believe, go up to 650, but then individual colleges and universities sometimes have their own prompts that they want you to answer, and those can range from 250 to, I believe, 750 as well. So depending on where you're applying, you may have extra essays to write, and the word counts will be within that range, most likely.
Yeah. And if I may add to that, I think the common application essay, they are also looking for a minimum of 250,
Mhm.
just like a healthy size for the story.
Absolutely. And we'll talk about where you should be in the word count as well later, so we can get more information on that.
Great. I have another question, which you did go over, but if you can expand, the question is, what do they look for when you are writing the essay? And I think we'll see more in the examples, but if you want to add something to that question, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So just reading an essay to figure out who someone is, that's in conjunction with, transcripts and all of those kinds of things. So they're not necessarily looking to understand the whole of you as a person, but they are looking to get an idea of what are your values, what kind of student will you be, if you join our community, what kind of assets will you bring, are you being authentic, are you being honest, is this somebody that can bring a viewpoint or discussions that other people might not be able to, right? And you all can do that because you've all lived a very unique life. So the idea is that in the writing, that needs to come across, that the way you think about things, the way you see the world, how you've changed as a person, that is more important than anything else, I believe.
Perfect. Awesome. Awesome. We have another great question, which I think is fantastic because I believe we have a mix of seniors, juniors. So the question is, when should you start brainstorming ideas for the college essay? I
Yeah,
love this
so
question.
there is never a time too early. You can always be thinking about things. Ultimately, the most important part of writing is always revising and editing, right? You don't want to ever submit your first draft anywhere. So if your applications are due on December 15th, it is a good idea to think about your essay before the month of December. You just want ample time to be able to sleep on what you've written, come back to it later, maybe get some advice from other people. Um, we'll mention it later, but instead of looking at the prompts and trying to pick like, you know what, I'm going to start thinking about my essay, which prompt should I do? What I suggest is if you're brainstorming ideas, simply think about specific moments in your life that have been important to you and impactful for you, and it is far easier to make that fit into a prompt than it would be to just say, okay, here's the question. Now I'm going to answer it directly. This also gives you the chance to take a more unique perspective. A lot of people will look at the prompts and then construct the writing, which means that a lot of essays are going to sound kind of similar. So if you pick something from your individual life that has not happened to anybody else because it happened to you, that is a much easier way to do that. So you can always be thinking about big moments in your life, especially small moments that on the outside look like this wasn't that big of a deal, but to you it really impacted you. That's very important because it's surprising, it's interesting, and it's something new that they haven't seen before.
No, that is perfect. I'm going to use that as a segue to add a little bit more that I agree it's never too early, and I'm going to push that boundary a little bit further and say you can even start as you get into high school or you're a sophomore because like Ali said, it's not about answering the question. It's about thinking about oh, there's this particular I don't know, science exhibition that I participated in while I was in sixth grade. And while in sixth grade, I didn't think about it. But right now, in my 10th grade, in my 11th grade, as I think about it, this is what changed or this is how it impacted. So think of it like as a journal, I say. So if there are students here who are not in their senior year, it'll be great to just have a Google Doc and just write when you get time. Will it change when you apply for your colleges? Probably, but then it'll be a great way to get into the habit of thinking about those things. And we'll see more of that in our examples.
Absolutely. And I mean, I just love what you said about journaling because I was going to say the same thing. Even if you're like years away from this process, uh, writing short entries or stories about important things that have happened to you or those small moments in your life is just great practice anyway for how to construct a narrative. So the more writing practice you get, whether it's creative writing or nonfiction writing or journaling, all of that will be helpful anyway. So daily writing is a great habit to build either way, even if it's just 5 minutes at the beginning or the end of every day.
So I'm going to ask one more question, but then I'm going to just note down. So please keep the questions coming because they're adding so much to the conversation. They're making it far more richer. So one of the questions that I have now is something that we'll get into when we discuss examples. So a student mentions that one of the topics they're thinking about is writing about their thirst of knowledge for a specific topic, like human anatomy specifically, maybe, or certain, and could be anything, right? Could be a very specific science, could be like geology, just like one tiny branch of subject of
Mhm.
science, right? So the question is, uh, they were going to talk about how they lose track of time when they learn about this. And they're a little apprehensive or afraid that it might be a cliche topic. So what advice do you have?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, that's one of the prompts that I think is great because it shows such individuality already, and it gives them an idea of not only do you have a specific interest or a specific idea of what you want in your future or what your brain is telling you that you're curious about, but also that you are driven, which is something that a lot of schools appreciate, are students that are driven and want to complete this task, right? So I think that's a great prompt, first of all, to pick. The cliche idea that they use in the Common App prompt of making you lose track of time, I can understand that you don't want to fall into using that same language. So again, I'm just going to fall back on the advice of be very specific. We're not talking about human anatomy or geology or whatever it is as a whole. We're talking about you in one specific moment of your life where this happened. So you don't actually have to mention it was like I lost track of time or I feel so immersed in this subject. It's better to give them a grounded example of when this happened and how that affected you and how you came out of it. So again, the more specific you can be, getting into the details, picking maybe like an hour of time rather than generalizing, the better your essay will be and the less likely it will be to fall into those common tropes.
So I'm going to pause with the questions, but we still have questions coming up. I'll let you
Great.
can move to examples, but please keep the questions, keep posting the questions to me, and I'll make sure it's answered.
Awesome. Yes, we should have time at the end. So uh, we're going to talk about the prompts now, and we'll actually see prompt number 6, which we just discussed. But my advice here might seem a little backwards, as I said before, but the specific moment that you want to tell about should come before picking a prompt, or that's what you should be brainstorming about, right? You shouldn't be brainstorming within the confines of the prompt. You should be brainstorming within the confines of your own life and your experience. We do that because it gives us the freedom to write the way that we want to and to construct something that is really compelling. When you go to make the edits that we said were very important, most important part of the writing process, that's when you can tweak some things to, shove it into prompt 6 or prompt 3 or prompt 1. But ahead of time, what we're really focusing on again is creating that compelling narrative arc and giving a specific moment from our life. So I have two examples here. This is number 1 and number 6. And I picked these to show and maybe to just discuss because I think that they elicit very specific personal stories. These ones are highly individualized. They give you this opportunity to maybe get more creative than telling a general story of, this failure that we're overcoming or an achievement that we had success with. If you've got something that is a specialized interest like anatomy, or like a lot about train engines or whatever it is, and the admissions people have just read a bunch of stories about, broad volunteering success or broad moving failures that have been overcome, yours will be more likely to stand out. So again, the more specific we can be to our lives and our individuality that nobody else can share, the more it will stand out. So after that, it's really just about your writer's voice and again, that authenticity to keep them engaged. So this is not to say that these are the two best prompts. These are just the ones that I think fit more with a very specific story if you have a specific thing in mind that you want to discuss. So when I was applying to schools many, many years ago, I picked the first prompt, and that is actually the example that we are going to look at, the essay that I had created for prompt number 1, talking about a background that was meaningful to me that I felt like my application would be incomplete without it. So as Ms. Priyanka said, please continue using the chat as we go through this, and you're welcome to interrupt me at any time if you want me to stop. But I am going to take you paragraph by paragraph through this essay. You're welcome to make your own comments as it, but I will talk you through it, and I will start by reading it to you, I suppose. So. In the simplest of terms, my application would be incomplete without the mention of two things, my dead father and apple pie. For the first 13 years of my life, my whole family would wake up early on October 1st, sometimes even at 3 o'clock in the morning before I had swim practice, to make a pie. My brother and I were peelers, hunched over the sink with paring knives, competing for two things, who could peel the most apples and who could make the longest peel. He always won the former as someone who liked to rush through their tasks to go play video games. I always won the latter, meticulous to no end. My mom was in charge of the crust and my dad was in charge of the filling. We were a perfect team. So this was my introductory paragraph, and we're going to go over some things that I think were successful and some things that were perhaps not so successful that I wish I had edited for and maybe given myself more time to make those revisions. So, first of all, I almost fell into this trope, right, of talking about maybe focusing my essay on the loss of a loved one. But instead, we kind of subverted the prompt itself and gave a surprising shift of focus to focus on something that was very, very specific, very grounded, maybe more simple, something that if you think about apple pie, you're not necessarily connecting it to grief right away, even though that's ultimately what my story was about. If I had focused it on grief, yes, it was very important to me, but unfortunately, a lot of people had similar essays, right? So I think a successful thing that I did was kind of subvert that, shift the topics, and picked something that maybe is a little surprising in a way. So focusing on pie instead of something else. The other thing is that, again, I was trying to get all of this information in about my life. There are a lot of things that make up who I am, but I didn't want to just bombard my admissions officer with, here are the things that I do, right? And so I used small details and just little asides to add that in. So I mentioned briefly that I was a competitive athlete, which was very important to me. And then here, when I'm talking about being meticulous, which is a skill that would be useful in school, right? Being very dedicated to something, wanting to do it the right way. I'm not going on and on about how meticulous I am. It's like, oh, this is really important to me. This is how I take on challenges. Instead, I'm doing the same thing. I'm grounding it in a very, very specific example, which is peeling apples. So the act of me peeling apples is what shows them that I'm meticulous. Perhaps I didn't have to say that out loud, but I'm not just saying it without anything behind it, right? I'm picking very specific examples. It's a story about making a pie, and that is what is showing people who I am and how I deal with obstacles or tasks. Unfortunately, I don't think my intro was very good. That first sentence is so, so important. And I believe that this one was a little too blunt. So it was very, very straightforward, and it was not as strong as a hook could have been. If I were thinking about this like a narrative, which I was not doing because I did not have this advice those years ago, perhaps I would have constructed a different hook to grab them instead of mentioning it here. Like I said about subverting the tropes, perhaps I wouldn't have mentioned this grief of losing a parent until later in the essay. Perhaps I would have focused on apple pie, really grabbed their attention, like, why is this person writing about pie? And then brought that up later. I think that would have been more impactful. So I think that is an issue with this hook here. Are there any questions about specifically this first paragraph? It is one of three paragraphs. Okay. I'm going to move on then to paragraph 2. You're welcome to jump in at any time. Paragraph 2, the year he died, my grandparents had flown from the Philippines to join us for this tradition, and they brought an antique pie dish as their contribution. Beautiful flowers and filigree on glass. Things started off well, and the cinnamony smell soon filled the whole house. When the timer went off, my mom donned her oven mitts, opened the door, pulled out the perfect apple pie, and dropped it. The dish shattered all over the kitchen floor, globs of pie stuck to the walls. My grandparents were furious. So again, there's some things that I did well, there's some things that I did not do so well. One of the things I did well, again, the things that I was kind of bouncing between, do I tell a story of my sports success, about being the child of immigrants, what am I going to do? Instead of that, I focused on a specific thing, apple pie, and instead used very small details in just a couple words to get that across, right? So not focusing my essay on that, but still including it because it is an important part of who I am. The other thing is that I have very specific physical descriptions. I'm trying to use imagery here. I was trying to be descriptive with my language because, again, it is like you are constructing a story. It's less like an academic essay. So I'm describing the flowers and the filigree. I'm describing the smell. We're trying to get all the senses here. We have this visual of the oven mitts, and then, of course, a dish shattering, and then pie stuck to the walls. So very tactile, sensory description here. We have also this conflict, failure, things not going to plan, right? So what this sets up is in the third paragraph, ideally, we will see my response to conflict. Again, it is not a story about how does Allie respond to conflict. That just happens within the narrative. Like in any good novel, characters overcome things, but that's not really like the meat of the action. The action is what is centered, the specific events are centered. So it's still about pie, but yes, they are going to hear about how I overcome conflict and failure. Something that I could have done better, a couple things. First of all, I think my timeline or the narrative was really unclear. I think how I could have really benefited from more edits is just reading this out loud. When I reread it at the age I am now, I was like, oh, you're right. That doesn't make sense when you actually hear it as a story. It makes sense to me because I lived it, but they don't know you like that. And so you need to make sure that the timeline and your narrative arc is clear, whether or not they know who you are. So I could have been more clear about the order of events here. And then I also had some very simple things like things started off well. That's fine to say, but looking back at it now, I think there might have been a better way for me to use more description, maybe get more specific instead of just saying that it started off well. Maybe I can describe how it's going great, build up the tension so that when it drops, it's a little more impactful. Saying someone is furious is fine, but it is usually much better to show someone being furious. How does their body look? How are they actually speaking? Again, specific sensory details are always great. I didn't end up hitting the word count on this, so I had a lot of time and a lot of words that I could have used to fill that in. And we are going to mention word count very briefly after this as well. So if I forget, please remind me to talk about that. But that was my paragraph number two, good things, bad things about it. This is my final paragraph. I was close to tears. This tradition was so important to us, and now it was all ruined. But then my mom started to laugh, and my dad joined in. Soon, all of us were giggling, using our fingers to scrape apple pieces from the corners of the kitchen and tiptoeing over the glass on the floor. What could have been a memory of disaster is now something that lingers for me in a different way. Each year on my dad's birthday, I get to remember that last October 1st pie and how we found joy in a difficult moment. It isn't easy living without someone who has had such a big impact on my life, but it's times like these that make it more bearable. What I keep of him now are the bittersweet cinnamon memories that remind me to look for laughter in what's broken and the reminder to not be someone who cries over spilled pie. So that was how I ended my essay, my third paragraph. And I think, again, being descriptive, using those details, that is great. What you're doing is you're really grounding the admissions officer in what you're talking about, right? So as they're reading, they should kind of feel like they are in that room with you or in whatever space that you are describing, being very specific, trying to hit as many senses as you can, smell, touch, what you hear, all of that. There's change here, and again, how I deal with failure or something going wrong, things not going to plan, how I see the world. I tried to subvert the spilled milk common phrase at the end with spilled pie. I don't know how successful that ended up being, but bigger lessons, right? So this is a very, very small moment in my life. It happened within a couple hours, and yet I'm kind of broadening it out to the kind of person that I am now. And that lets them think about what kind of student am I going to be? How am I going to add to the community, right? Am I someone that is going to be able to overcome the challenges that will happen in college? Am I someone that is going to be able to kind of like deal with change? Because the whole idea of going off to university is big change, right? So you need to be someone that is able to roll with the punches in that way. And so that is something that I attempted to show there. Uh, Trap that I fell into, I was stating things that were already very, very obvious. This tradition was so important to us. They know that because I'm writing about it, right? You don't need to over-explain your story. If anything, you want to keep them wanting more, right? So if I'm over-explaining this, they're going to be like, yeah, we know this already. These are adults that have read a lot of essays. They know that whatever you're writing about is very important to you. So I didn't need to say that. It was unnecessary and I could have cut that out. Which kind of brings us to these overall tips about editing, which I would love to go through. But if there's any questions about the essay so far before we get into how I would edit this now and what I wish I had known, I'm happy to talk about that. Does anybody have any questions? Or Priyanka, are there any questions from people about the essay?
Not about the examples, but yes, we do
Oh,
have
great.
questions. I've been kind of trying to answer as much as I can.
Yeah.
But yeah, let me get to the first one. I think these are such great questions. Is if someone else other than the student, like parent or siblings, write the essay, how would the admission officer know?
Yeah, so this is a fantastic question. And because everybody's writer's voice is so unique, I I don't know how to describe it, but as a teacher myself, I had kids that would have parents write essays or use ChatGPT, and it's just incredibly obvious. It's not only about the word choice, but it's about the way that you're constructing sentences. It's very clear to read something and tell this is written by like an adult in the business world versus this is written by a high schooler, right? And they don't want adults or formulaic ChatGPT essays. They want people, right? They want real high schoolers that have real feelings about things and real life experiences. And you lose a lot more by getting someone to write it for you than what you would gain. They'll read a lot of those essays already, and in my experience, those are ones that automatically. If they have an inkling that this was not written by you, they will toss it out and not even consider the rest of your application. So it is totally okay to get help with editing if you're like, hey, parent, can you read this? Or like you want to take it to your English teacher or you run spell check. Like that is absolutely fine. But you need to start with a foundation that is you. Because the way that I write these sentences, if Miss Priyanka were to write the same story, even like almost exactly the same kind of events are happening, you could be able to tell our essays apart just because the way that I use different types of phrases, the way that I put my grammar in, punctuation, all of that is like a thumbprint, really. So every writer's voice is very easy to distinguish, especially for people that are used to reading a lot of essays. So maybe you can get away with it that someone has never read an essay before, but if it's a teacher or an admissions officer, usually it's quite clear.
That is true. And I'll add to that. What I was answering is that a lot of the times the admission officers they compare the inconsistencies between like all of your application materials because essays are one part of it. There could be in your application form could be like a short question that you might have answered. Sometimes they also conduct interviews. They will speak to you, not elaborate interviews. They just want to have a conversation. So we write how we speak. Most of the time, we kind of use the same words. And then, of course, needless to say, please don't use AI. It's not worth the risk. That's all I'm going to say.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Even if you're trying to change just two sentences or two lines or just something. And also it's very artificial. It's like the difference between an artificial plant and a plant that you grow and water and it's your own. Some of the leaves will be, I don't know, brown, yellow, but that's what makes it beautiful, right?
Right. I
Uh,
would much rather read an essay that has a very distinct writer's voice and maybe a lot of mistakes than I would read an essay that's like technically grammatically perfect, but is just so flat, so boring, no personality, right? They want to see your personality. And so that, yeah, I would recommend writing it all yourself. Only you can do that. You want it to be something that only you can have created.
yeah, absolutely. And I want to add to that, like, don't underestimate. I put it there as well on the chat, but just saying it out loud, don't underestimate your power and your skill to tell your own story. So don't let anyone else tell it, like say it, right? It's your story. Like Ali was saying in the beginning that it's like saying you're telling your story where you are the main character, the protagonist of your story. So yeah, you can say it the best. All right, moving on to questions. So are prompts given for college essays?
Yes. So their Common App has 7 prompts, and if Ms. Priyanka, if you want to find those and maybe copy paste them in the chat, because I don't think I can do that as I'm sharing my screen. But we had 2 examples of the prompts here, and there are 7 total. But then also, if you're applying to like 4 different schools, they might each have their own question, like, okay, describe what going to this school would mean to you, or describe a moment where XYZ happened. The nice thing about this is that a lot of those colleges, they will be kind of similar. So if you write one response to this question of like, what does it mean to you to go to higher education? The next university might have a question that is very similar, maybe just worded a little differently. And so if you have written it, then you can absolutely try and make it fit into that next prompt. But depending on the type of school that you go to, they will have different prompts for you. It is very unlikely that you will have one that just says, write whatever you want, and you kind of go off. They're usually looking for something specific, the specific things that we mentioned before, and so there will be prompts for you. Any other questions before we go on to editing?
So somehow the chat didn't allow me to paste all the prompts. Um,
Okay.
what I'm going
Um,
to do is I did the 3 on the top, and then I'm going to paste 4 to 7 because I did not know this, but there's a character limit to how
the
much you
more you know.
can. Yeah. See, these are also things, and we have seen that in essays when we have worked with students, is uh, the things that you say. Sometimes, if you haven't written it, your experiences sound very artificial. It's like, oh, there is no way that this could have happened. It's easy to say when you have. So think of it this way, like this admission officers, whoever they're reading this stories, they have been reading this for years and years and years, right? So they're good at kind of detecting those things. But uh, so kind of a related question, and then I'll move on to the next question. The are the prompts same every year?
Common App prompts. So mine was the same from however many years ago it was. Number one was the same, but they had added a couple more. So Common App prompts might stay, probably will stay relatively the same. Individual universities, I can't say for sure. Some years they would change things to look, if they're looking to go into a different kind of demographic that they want to get, they might change their prompt. I'm not sure about individual universities, but Common App has stayed relatively the same. So if you're thinking like a couple years into the future when you might be applying to college, you can start constructing something that might fit one of these prompts. But again, I would suggest construct your story first and then see if it fits one of them, right? Like it's a lot easier to fit something that is so compelling and so specific and personal to you to a big prompt than it is to make a big prompt so specific and unique and like what you are.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, the next one is while writing a message in your story that forms connections, how do you avoid sounding preachy?
Yeah, so I think we can look at this because my ending also sounds a little preachy, right? I'm like, oh, here's my big moral life lesson. And that's something that I would have loved to go back and change if I were going back to undergraduate school. I think what you have to assume is that these people reading your essays are smart enough that you don't need to explain big things to them, right? Like they are adults, they've lived a life, they've also read hundreds of essays, thousands, millions, I don't know, of essays. So I don't necessarily think I needed to spell out for them, it isn't easy living like life without this, right? I think they can assume that from the way that I'm talking about things. So what I would have done if I could go back is maybe talk more about what I appreciated about this lovely family relationship that we had where we made this pie, and I could have left out this ending theme. The theme should be prevalent throughout the words and the details and the moments that you're discussing anyway. So we gotta assume that these admissions officers are smart enough to catch the theme like we would do in a high school English class. In Great Gatsby, it's not like Nick ever says, and the theme is this, right? Like we discover that as readers. And I think that what we should do what should be done is that you have to assume that they know how to find a theme as well. So maybe not being so obvious and stating things like this tradition was important. We don't need that. Here's this life lesson at the end. Is there a different way that I can explain it that is again grounded in specific things? That probably would have been more successful.
And then just to add to that, while writing the essay, as you have seen through the examples, and this is something that you have been hearing since I believe your sixth grade, is to use the senses, right? So they're like shattered glass, and then so think about what those specific details um, you can mention in your story to paint that picture. All right, so okay, this is also a really good one. Questions are really good. You guys are um, awesome. What type of books are good to read to build language for college essay?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So anything that you are interested is a good book to read. If you're
Yes.
into graphic novels, read the graphic novels. If you're into like high fantasy, sci-fi, read that. If you want to read biographies of famous people, read that. The more reading you do, no matter what kind of reading it is, the better your writing will be. I still read a lot of like young adult, like middle school fantasy novels because I just enjoy it. It's fun. And the language that's used there, it might not be as big of a vocabulary, but they're still constructing sentences and constructing a narrative arc in a very compelling way, right? And so I'm still absorbing these lessons and these tips for writing, no matter what it is that I am reading. The more you read, the more your vocab will grow, the more your sentence structure skills will grow. Just keep reading anything that you're interested in. That's my advice.
True. And just to use real life examples, there is a student who wrote an essay about art, being drawn to art, drawing and making characters, doodling. And that love is attached to how that student was very much into graphic novels. But you will always find probably advice here and there that, oh, graphic novels are not real novels. Students need to start reading like chapter books or things like that. But then it reflects who the student is. So kind of this again goes back to the college essays are more about who you are. If you're trying to read something that someone else loves, then you will not be able to extract anything from there to be able to reflect or write about it. So solid advice to follow, like read what you can. All right, so okay, I'm looking at the time. I want to make sure like all of
Yeah.
you get back to your
Let me go through some, I think maybe very quick editing, and then we can maybe wrap up some of the other questions if that's okay, because I want to make sure that editing is such an important part. I want to make sure to give you guys this
Yes,
list.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Let's do that.
So, editing, the most important part of writing your first draft. My first draft, or writing your Common App essay, mine was awful. It was terrible. I found it again when I was looking for this, and I was embarrassed. But that is how it's supposed to be with the first draft. You just have to get your ideas out, figure out what you want to say, and from there, you get to make it more polished, right? So, reading it out loud is huge. What I do now is I record myself on my phone and I listen back to it because when you're thinking about the way sentences flow and you've stared at this document for days or hours or however long it is that you've been working on it, your brain is automatically going to recognize the patterns of the text and then skip over mistakes or things that don't sound quite right. So listening to it, reading it simply is great. You can get someone else to read it to you. Another big thing is that if you just change the font type, so that it looks different. This is another trick to help your brain not skip over those moments where you made a grammatical error or you missed a word, things like that. So definitely read it out loud, even if it's a little embarrassing, then just go in your room and read it out loud in your room. The more that you can cut things from your essay, the better your essay will be. Sometimes this is like, I don't want to, I want to tell them they need to know all of these things about me, right? But ultimately, you want them to want to know more about you. You don't want to bore them. So if they finish reading your essay and they're like, man, that was a great essay about like this lost shoe that this person like dropped in a park somewhere, but I want to know more about like how did they react to that? What else is going on in their life? Why did they write about a shoe? The more questions they have, the more inclined they are to be thinking about your essay and your application and you as a student in general. So always cut when you can. No need to ramble. They've seen a lot of essays where people ramble. They've read hundreds before yours. It's okay to not hit the word count. It is much better to cut things that are unnecessary, like what we talked about in my example. Think about your essay as a like rapids trip instead of a lazy river. So what I mean by that is not only are we punchy and to the point, trying to be quick so that we're not wasting their time, we're going from a point A to a point B. This is still a narrative, it's still a story, and so we don't want to have a circular thing where you intro it where I love volunteering, here's where I volunteered, and you end it with the same phrase. It should move from one place to another. There should be change and conflict somewhere within that gets you to that point B. And then finally, if we're thinking about it like a sandwich, we have to focus on the bread. I did not do a very good job at my hook or my kicker, which is the closing sentence. Those are things that maybe I could have gone back and tweaked if I had edited more. So I wish I had left myself time to revise. But making sure that you're starting it off really punchy, and when you're ending it, it's with something that they are going to be sticking with later on. They might think about it later. They might say, I wish they had written more. That is always best. So ultimately, here are the things that we talked about. You should be authentic. That's number one. That's super important. You want to be as specific as you can, like Priyanka was saying, with the sensory details, but then also just with the moment that you choose. We don't want to talk about this broad topic. We really want to zoom in as much as we can. If you can surprise them in a way of like, why are we writing about this instead of this big topic that it seems connected to, that's great. It keeps them on their toes, keeps them interested. Having that narrative arc, using those details to show, going through the drafting and editing process as many times as you're allowed. So if you start now, make sure you're drafting, sleeping on it, coming back to it, drafting, sleeping on it, coming back to it. Get some other people to read it for you. That's great. Have them help you, but don't lose your voice. If you're going to use things to help, that's great. Help is there. You should ask for it. But ultimately, it is your essay. You are the one that is going to be attending one of these universities or colleges. And so you have to trust yourself. They want you. They don't want the people that are helping you, right? And so have confidence in what you're writing. Enjoy the process. If you're enjoying the story that you're writing, they can tell that from the tone and the flow, and you'd much rather have that than something that is flat. So definitely stay authentic and be true to yourself. Those are my attempted quick tips. I know I probably rambled a little too long. I would have not hit the word count here. But if there's any final questions, we can definitely go over. I'll stop sharing. We can discuss some of the questions that we have, or if you guys want to just chat about college app things.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly some quick questions that can be addressed. I think one of the questions was college application essays, do they need to be MLA formatted? The quick answer is no, but make sure like they're readable. You have a structure, you follow like the pattern of writing an essay. Um,
And you can still quote people or articles in your essay if you want to. But I would say, you want to focus on yourself and not what John Adams or somebody said.
this is again, you're right. That's right. So we are at 12:32. So maybe this is the last question that we'll discuss. But before I discuss that question, you all your parents have received email from us with the links. So you can just respond to that email if you have further questions or if you want to reach us.
Oh, that's
We,
right.
of course, provide help few different ways, brainstorming or even just editing. So either way. But this is a great question and it would be great for everybody to learn. How important are supplement essays in comparison to the main Common App essay?
Ooh, so every aspect of your application is going to be important. The weight, if you're looking for a weight distribution, I don't have a number for you, but supplementary essays are great. The only thing that they're going to do is help show more of who you are, right? So because the Common App essay goes everywhere, it's probably good to start with that one and focus on that one. And the supplementary essays, some colleges and universities don't require them, right? So if you're thinking about which one should I focus on more, I would say the Common App essay, but that's not to say that the supplementary essays just get thrown out. They're another way to get more of your voice, learn more about you, kind of round out that picture that is incredibly hard to round out within a small word count, right? I don't know
Uh,
if that answered the question, but.
No, I think it did. A quick related question. So if you can tell everyone a little bit about what are supplementary essays.
Yes. So the schools that you're applying to, if they're within the Common App program, you have a choice of 7 prompts to write that big essay. But each university has different requirements depending on what they're looking for and what kind of school they are. If you have schools that have maybe lower acceptance rates, they might have more supplementary requirements because they want to be very specific about who they're accepting and who they're waitlisting and all of that. So some schools will give you extra prompts to answer with various word counts ranging from 250 to, I believe, 750. And those are just extra requirements that as you're filling out the application, you will need to submit. So it's not an every school thing, but some schools do require you to answer more than one prompt.
All right, I think we will, the chat is buzzing with questions. Oh, we have someone appreciating your apple pie essay, and
Oh,
maybe
thanks.
we can. Thank you. Yes, I thought so too. I think it's great. And I think that there's a, if I may, Ali, talking about your essay, but I wanted to kind of piggyback on that compliment as well as like the essay. When I read it, that's what admission officers are looking for, is that something every day, right? And then that's what is visible. So stories usually have that something that is visible, but then underneath there are layers of things that happen which show how that one thing, which is like making apple pie, could be so incredibly important, right? It could be anything for you. It could be the love for your um I don't know, game night with families. Could be anything. I'm just making it up as we go. But with that, I think we will end this. I am going to stop recording.